The rain had been steady all night, a thin curtain against the windows, a steady hiss that blurred the line between the outside world and the steady hum inside my room. I sat close to the desk, head bent over the receiver, its green dial glowing faintly. I had left the recorder running for hours, making note of every irregular spike, every sharp drop into silence. Most nights nothing stood out. Only static, only vagueness like the ocean whispering across wires. Tonight it felt different. Too focused. Each gust of rain against the glass seemed to beat in rhythm with the interference. I leaned close to the microphone, whispering the details. My notes had filled half a notebook already. Frequencies scrawled in pencil. Lines of timestamps I barely understood anymore. The weather band should have been predictable, meteorological loops repeating with dependable monotony. Instead, bursts of noise flickered through at unpredictable intervals. Not random. Some part of me resisted calling it that. I set the headphones tight against my ears and waited. The hiss deepened. A tone surfaced, then vanished. Like something trying to remain unheard. I adjusted the tuning knob, millimeter movements. Static surged, fell away, then surged again with a whistle behind it. My chest tightened at the pattern. Whistles rise when pressure shifts. They signal a flaw inside an instrument. But what if the flaw was engineered? I wrote the sequence down, each pulse spaced evenly on the page. Outside, thunder rolled distant, supporting the pattern like a backdrop. It made me think of something recorded once before. A passage buried inside a file I had read months ago. Operation Highjump. I had been down that rabbit hole before. A massive naval expedition, thousands of men, ships sent southward after the war. The official record claimed it was surveying routes, conducting research. Yet pages remained classified long past what protocol allowed. I remembered one memo in particular, declassified only in fragments. Someone describing a magnetospheric anomaly, patterned, received during cum sweep. I had memorized the wording because it came out of nowhere, just a stray half sentence. Patterned, cum sweep. It haunted me then, as it haunts me now. The receiver hiss shifted again. I kept my voice low. This is not weather. I didn't want to sound unstable on tape, but how could static echo the past? The noise modulated sharply just as I spoke, dipping into a clean space, hollow in its precision. For a second I thought I heard a number, the syllables clear, then buried. I replayed it, but only caught half a flicker, a faint faster rhythm overlaying the hiss. Too sharp for nature, too exact for chance. The glow of the dial lit only part of the room, leaving corners in shadow. I let the recording continue, sitting back, forcing a steady breath. My brother would have laughed at me, called it nerves. But my brother wasn't here. He had once served on a survey ship, long before his disappearance. I don't say his name out loud often. It feels like breaking something. Yet tonight every sound was tuned to memory, as if the storm outside spoke his absence in code. I kept the receiver on, documenting the shifting pattern. There were bursts that didn't fit weather compression or background scatter. When storms roll in, frequencies often clog. I knew that. Tonight they unfolded like intervals marked in advance. When I scribbled them down and played back the tape, the pulses matched evenly like bars of unfinished music. 3 seconds of hiss, one sharp chirp, then silence. Over and over, returning with a rhythm I could almost count against my own heartbeat. The rain against the glass joined the procession. When I closed my eyes, the difference vanished. It was all one long symmetry, external and internal bleeding across. I spoke softly, explaining each detail for the recorder, as if telling a story to someone who would never believe me otherwise. My hand shook even as I wrote. The thunder outside rolled in nearer, but it no longer sounded like weather. Each clap entered the earphones delayed, shaped. Something intercepted along the way. I scrolled back, replayed. then leaned closer until my ear pressed sorely into the cup of the headphones. The sound now felt intentional. Static is never clean, yet these edges were razor precise. No bleed, no fading, just articulated bursts that left me cold down the spine. I whispered again into the mic, "If this is interference, interference has purpose." The rain hammered suddenly in reply, hammering the glass walls, hammering my chest. I shut my eyes and let the noise wash over me. If anyone else were sitting here, they'd insist it was only atmospheric scatter. They'd point to sunspot activity, shifting ionospheres, stray commercial bands. But the voice in my head kept repeating the same quiet insistence. This is not random. This is something reaching, hiding within bandwidths no one listens to anymore. And on nights like this, with rain menacing the edges of hearing, the disguise finally slips. The dial burned faint yellow. I scribbled one more sequence down. Chirp, silence, hiss, chirp. The second playback was clearer. Not imagination. Not misplacement. It sounded like a system folding itself open, trying once more to be heard. My throat tightened, words halting. I leaned into the mic. My voice cracked with a mix of fear and awe. Something is behind this. I almost turned the receiver off. Almost stood up and ended the night as nothing more than curiosity stretched too far. But I remained. Body heavy. Breath thin. Because for the first time on tape, the interference bent into perfection. The modulation settled into a shape no storm could mimic. It cut through static like a blade, sharp in every beat. A jolt that left no excuse. Too clean to dismiss. Too sharp to ignore. The last sound carried weight unlike anything before. Intent, sudden and undeniable. Not weather. Not chance. Something intentional was calling through the static tonight. The morning after the first recording, I sat with folders spread across the table. The rain had lingered overnight and left the windows blurred with streaks, as if even daylight refused to come through clean. I had requested stacks of documents months earlier, pried loose from archives using the Freedom of Information Act. Most of the pages were dull. Logistics lists, fuel inventories, vague mentions of weather conditions at sea. But between two yellowing sheets, I found something faint, half blurred by the copy process. A line of numbers typed in an unfitting font, nearly smudged into invisibility. Coordinates, or almost coordinates. One set matched a latitude I knew belonged to Antarctica. The longitude was tougher to parse. Half the digits smeared, two overlapped. To anyone else, it might have looked like a clerk's mistake. To me, it was deliberate, the kind of misprint that hides intention. I kept staring at those numbers. It bore a strange resemblance to the anomalies I had written down the night before, the rhythm of pulses hidden in static like numbers calling back. I told the recorder, voice steady, this is something they didn't mean to leave visible. I unfolded a map across the table, fingertips pressing corners flat. Scanners hummed as I nudged the sheet beneath its glass, making sure to capture the faint blur of the digits. Then I opened satellite maps on the laptop and began the process of cross-checking. Most of Antarctica glared blank, white spread against white. But when I pinned the closest coordinates available, the screen darkened in one unusual patch. No topography, no albedo difference, no mapped terrain. A slope should have shown. Instead it was gray. Dead imaging dot, it looked like a hole deliberately filled. A patch without detail, where every other glacier was charted line by line. I zoomed in, then out, then back again. The blur shifted, but the dead zone remained, a rectangular cut across the continent. I whispered into the recorder, keeping my tone even. This is not an oversight. This is cut out. My chest tightened grimly. My brother's absence ached behind the thought. I tuned the receiver near a naval frequency, the kind most scanners avoid, rarely active outside scheduled bursts. My headphones filled with silence, then the familiar hiss I had grown to expect. I watched the dials flicker once, twice, then plummet. A low hum emerged, holding steady across several seconds. Lower than anything before. It felt like the room itself vibrated faintly, as if wood and bone were resonating in unison. I drew a sharp breath just as it broke into fragments. Long pause, short pause, repeat. Numbers again. They weren't spoken, not in any human cadence. They were implied. The hum pulsed with spacing, as though counting itself aloud. 4 beats. Then 5. Consistent, undeniable. I grabbed my notes and scribbled down 45, twice in succession before the signal cut off. I sat motionless until the rain's tapping reminded me I was still in a room, still grounded by things as ordinary as weather. My voice cracked as I leaned into the mic. 45 repeats. But who, if anyone, is supposed to hear this? I cross-checked the blurred coordinates once more. The numbers 4 and 5 did not seem random now. I traced the latitude line closely, measuring nautical miles between the blurred digits and identifiable markers. The gap was nearly 45 nautical miles from where the blank rectangle began. I swallowed hard. My handwriting began to shake. No text file could explain coincidence this sharp. Either someone constructed the deletion with intention, or something inside demanded alignment with the very interference spilling through the receiver. Hours passed. I replayed the tape repeatedly. Each time, the hum emerged slightly different, like the act of listening adjusted it. At times I thought I imagined a consonant sneaking between pulses. At others, it was just tone. Nothing precise enough to claim. At least not out loud. My eyes ached from staring at maps, red arteries running through sclera like frantic scratches. I reached for water but knocked the glass over instead. The pages smeared as droplets spread across the numbers. My hand froze. Water blurred things exactly like the original copied file. I whispered into the tape. Blurring removes certainty. It doesn't remove truth. My whisper cracked under its own tension. The hum had shifted pitch without warning, crawling slightly higher, biting at the edges of the ear. Rain crashed harder against the glass, sinking again with modulation. The amplifier's needle bent forward, then quivered back. Locked to a beat I no longer wanted to follow yet couldn't turn away from, I rubbed my temple. Coordinating weather band anomalies, blurred coordinates, and cut-out satellite imagery was irrational. But the stack of circumstances bent too far from ordinary explanation. I pulled another folder closer, scanned paragraphs detailing ship deployment charts. One line caught me: prolonged absence, communications limited. No stated reason. Just buried absence in print. I stared until the words dissolved inside my vision. I placed the receiver back to naval frequency and whispered. Voice calm though my heart thundered uneven. If this is only pattern, prove it by stopping. The hum did not stop. Instead it sharpened, lengthened, and built until my headphones trembled faintly. My throat tightened, but I described everything as it unfolded, pulses spacing, 45 seconds apart, then silence, then a resumption at slightly different amplitude. The tape caught the tremor in my breathing. My brother's name lingered unsaid, as if each pulse pulled me closer to the old wound. He had charted maps I never saw, spent months at sea in silence. Could this be a vestige of where he had gone? I brushed the idea aside too late. The thought anchored fast. My confession spilled low. The dead zone doesn't hide absence. It hides memory. The hum ceased as sharply as it began, leaving no residual static. The room fell into a hollow quiet, where even the drip from the ceiling stopped. I looked at my laptop again. The rectangular blank stared back, indifferent, untouched, mocking every explanation. I pressed record once more, words spilling half hoarse, half prayer. If files wanted to stay lost, they should not echo through static. They should not leave coordinates scarred into pages. I pushed my chair back, standing unsteadily. Every shove of the chair leg against the ground felt like punctuation far too loud in the silence. The rain had slowed outside, replaced by a heavier stillness. I could no longer say this was curiosity. I muttered into the recorder. If blurred numbers can return in signal form, someone, something, still transmits from beneath that void. I touched the page one final time, tracing the copied coordinate blur like it might yield more by feel. My finger trembled against ink. Memory and research had folded together into one indistinct sheet. I stared into the dead zone rectangle on the map as though it might start moving. My conclusion felt clearer than any evidence had the right to provide. The words left my mouth with no hesitation. There is a dead zone where evidence should exist, and it wants me looking. The stack of documents had grown unruly, pages spilling from folders as though trying to escape the desk. I had sorted them by type shipping reports, flight manifests, crew lists. Tonight I read them aloud into the recorder, one by one, steady voice, trying to make order by sound as well as sight. Most dates lined up flawlessly, but patterns began to emerge. Certain journeys outbound, no noted return. Cargo tallies incomplete. Lines cut abruptly mid-sentence. One transport report ended with departure confirmed, yet no arrival logged. Another showed a crew roster filled outbound. But the return column was empty, as if no one had bothered to check boxes. My pencil circled every missing entry, the page crisscrossed with dark loops. I leaned into the mic. These aren't clerical errors. This feels deliberate, I whispered. The room answered with faint background interference, static creeps that hadn't been there in the silence moments earlier. I paused, listening carefully as the receiver hummed faintly from the shelf. I had not turned it on tonight, yet the recorder picked up hiss anyway. It blended with my own breathing. When I replayed the last few seconds, the hiss grew sharper, alive. A familiar low threat, tucked in plain white noise. I rubbed my temple with the back of my hand and took another page off the stack dot. This one was different. Dated weeks after Operation Highjump had officially ended. It listed supplies unloaded at port, but the origin location field was left blank. My throat tightened as I whispered it aloud, narrating. Supplies arrived, but they do not say from where. The words felt heavy in my mouth. I found another manifest that listed fuel consumption unaligned with distance traveled, far more burned than the log expected. As if the ship had gone further than recorded. I couldn't fight the impulse to call someone who might confirm my suspicion. A name surfaced, someone I had exchanged guarded emails with. A technician, once part of the Naval Communications Group, who claimed to have handled spectrum sweeps decades past. She answered quietly, her voice roughened by age and caution. I told her what I had found: skipped records, blank origins, fuel misalignments. She listened without interruption, then spoke firmly enough to make my hands still. Those skips are never clerical. They're placeholders. You cut a return to keep the distance shorter in public view. It hides where they really went, she said. My jaw tightened. On tape, my voice trembled out, so redaction disguised as incompetence. She gave a grim laugh no louder than static. We called them ghosts. Ghost logs. Never official, but we all knew. Her voice softened. If you keep finding them, record carefully. They always cluster around something bigger. As if on cue, the receiver snapped awake by itself. Harmonics rose from silence to a high metallic chorus. Gain meters leapt, redlining violently. I pressed my palms against headphones, but the sound stabbed through bone. A layered scream hidden beneath musical overtones. The desk vibrated faintly. Do you hear this? I shouted toward the recorder, though even speaking felt torn apart by the surge. The technicians lying frayed in panic. Kill the input, shut it down now. But before I reached for the dial, the noise cut off. plunging into blankness so sudden the absence rang louder than presence. My breath tore out ragged, scattered. Pens and papers slid as if the vibration had shifted gravity itself. I slumped forward, trembling, then forced my hand to the playback switch. Slowly, the taped version rolled back what had just happened. I expected random distortion. Instead, I heard rhythmic pulsing. The harmonics I thought were random now formed intervals, rise, drop, rise again, measured like syllables. My pencil scribbled furiously into the notebook. 3 beats, 1 pause, 3 beats again. Not noise, not artifact. A voice trying to form inside the corruption. I spoke into the mic with shaken words. Patterns make intention. Ghost logs make silence. If Expedition brought something back, maybe they also brought the signal aboard. I rubbed my eyes hard, forcing myself to remain steady. My hand shook too much to hold the pen. If they carried it on ships, those missing arrivals might not be men. They might be recordings. The technician murmured back, her voice dry yet haunted. More than once I saw lines skip like that. Fuel missing, ships out longer than printed. We were told never to ask why. She went quiet, then whispered, "What you played back just now, don't treat it as error. Treat it as presence." I repeated the word on tape, presence. My pulse hammered behind ribs like a second metronome. I replayed the distortion again. This time it struck clearer, like a syllable reaching halfway into language. Not a human tongue, not weather interference, but something bent into memory by steel hulls and copper wire. The needle jerked again without warning, only once, then fell flat. Rain began outside, unrolling sheets against glass, joining hum of old machines. I leaned against the desk, whispers low. Ghost logs aren't empty. They're filled with something that refuses to print clean. I closed the folder, pressing palms flat, ceiling trembling beneath skin. The recorder caught my final quiet words. The question stays open. Did they carry a signal back aboard, disguised as supplies? Or did the signal carry them? The tape ended there, uncertain and cold. The drawer stuck slightly before it slid open, wood swollen by damp air. Inside lay the letter, folded where I had abandoned it years earlier. Half a page of ink, the rest blank. I lifted it carefully, the edges browned, the creases threatening to split. My brother's name stared up at me from the salutation, written with a younger hand. One that believed words might bridge the silence between us. One flattened the paper on the desk while the recorder spun. My voice caught as I began to read. Dear, I don't know if this will ever reach you. I paused, throat tightening, eyes burning with heat I had tried to smother for years. Rain pressed faintly against the window, steady but fragile, as if listening. I continued reading broken sentences about his sea posting. Questions about weather he would never answer. By the midpoint, the words trailed into white space where the pen had stopped. I hadn't been able to write farewell or hope. Just nothing. The hiss of the receiver swelled without my touch, low static that clung to the edges of hearing. As I spoke his name aloud, rain began to fall heavier, sinking with the hiss. Each drop timed uncomfortably close to pulses I had documented before. I whispered, "It feels like the storm is pressing itself into the tape." My chest shook. Half grief, half wonder, I thought of him on deck somewhere. Jacket soaked, staring across gray horizons just as I stared at blurred maps now. My voice cracked. You left lines unfinished, and I'm still here, chasing crumbs inside interference. I had not meant it to sound like confession, but on playback, it surely would. I dropped my hands to the desk and let my breathing fill the silence. The phone vibrated. I answered quickly. My ally's voice cut in, sharp but hushed. "You have to be careful," she said. "Signal stress is real. Too much exposure pulls you apart inside." I saw it happen. Men trembling, forgetting days, swearing the hum followed them home. Her words struck something raw. Warning from a place that felt too lived in to dismiss. I can't stop, I told her bluntly. It isn't history anymore. It's him. She sighed, static clipping her voice for a moment. Don't burn your mind chasing echoes, she pleaded. I stared down at the half-written letter, shaking my head. It isn't Echo. It knows his name. As if challenged, the receiver popped sharply. The hiss turned brittle, then thin, then sudden sharp crackles burst through. My headphones nearly lifted from the force of it. I leaned closer, describing every shift. The recorder caught my breath quickening. This is stronger than before, I said, half whisper, half warning. Like the tape itself is pulled taut. The crackle lined into order. Short, clean bursts separated by steady pauses. My pencil dragged across the notebook as I counted. Short, long, short. Dots and dashes. Adapted language etched in lightning. The first cluster spelled nothing, too jagged. The second cluster painfully clear-formed letters. Undeniable. My brother's name dotted, repeated, stuttering as if insistent. Each pulse carved deeper, fuller. The word I had read from an old letter had been caught, returned. My stomach lurched, muscles stiff with disbelief. Rain battered glass in rhythm, hammering affirmation no one else could hear. The Ally's voice cracked through the phone again, cutting and frantic. Stop recording, now, you don't understand what it's doing. But I had already gripped the pen so hard, my knuckles whitened. My voice went steady into the mic. No, the search has changed. It isn't about files or maps. This is blood. This is name carried back. The bursts continued, dots and dashes spelling it once more, drawn out in clearer spacing as though teaching a stubborn listener. I whispered his name aloud in rhythm with them, every syllable melting into hum. My throat ached like I was learning their language rather than repeating my own dot. My ally's voice splintered, buried beneath distortion, desperate words lost to surge. I caught fragments. Not safe. It feeds. Don't. Then silence. I stayed seated, entranced, until the receiver thudded once in finality and cut to hollow static. The room exhaled into quiet, but the tape rolled on. I whispered, voice bare. The letter stayed unfinished. The signal finished it for me. The archive was colder than expected, the kind of chill that seeped into sleeves and made fingers stiff against paper. Rows of shelves ran narrow and endless, each stacked with boxes labeled in neat institutional script. I signed the ledger with a pen that barely worked and carried the reels of microfilm to a reader humming in the corner. Fluorescent bulbs overhead flickered softly, odd half-beats against the silence. I sat, adjusted the seat, and fed the first roll doc. My recorder was perched on the shelf beside the machine, tape spinning with its familiar low hiss. I spoke carefully, each word meant to hold the moment alive for later. Regional Archive, Reel number 17, marked Defense Department, declassified section. My voice echoed faintly more than I expected, bouncing like a hollow chamber rather than a single room. I slid the reel forward, frame by frame, eyes straining as grainy images bloomed across the screen. Most frames were what I anticipated: weather reports, survey entries, documents stamped with black redactions. But one frame caught me off guard. A photograph white out conditions on the polar ice. The snow blurred sky and ground into one sheet of emptiness. But across the negative, faint lines appeared. They cut the image at an odd angle, too straight to be natural. I leaned closer, squinting. The lines curved, intersected, then bloomed outward like long skeletal antenna structures. I whispered into my recorder, "This doesn't look accidental. It looks constructed." My throat felt dry as the image trembled beneath the machine's lamp. I adjusted focus, but the lines remained, impossibly clean against storm blur. Wind should bend snow into chaos, not carve symmetry. I traced the image with my finger hovering over the glass, outlining arcs that crossed into geometric bloom. I dialed my ally. Her breath came through weary but wary. I described what I saw. She listened, then answered firmly, "Film doesn't do that. Grain spreads randomly. Those patterns only happen if something else is laid over it. Interference, overlay, or purposeful." Her word fractured into static, as if the very connection disagreed. I stared back into the glowing image, heart pounding. The recorder hum deepened, a new layer under my voice as I spoke. The lines are blooming over weather like veins beneath skin. The hum persisted, and each word rebounded oddly in the room like a faint chorus of repetition behind aisles of documents. I turned, startled. No one in the archive but me, yet I swore I heard a faint whispering mimic. I shook it off and forced the reel forward. Frame after frame, variations of storms, snow, ice. But every 20 images, more faint lines appeared. Sometimes arcs, sometimes lattice, sometimes half visible like ghosts embedded deep in emulsion. My excitement pressed against dread. If these weren't accidents, then the images weren't neutral. They were carrying forward the same intrusion I had heard on tape. Outside, rain intensified suddenly, pelting the thin pane glass. The sound bled strangely, filling the room as if rain was striking shelves and floor, even indoors. It synchronized with the reel as it spun beneath my hand, each click joining rainfall in an unnatural cadence. I whispered urgently into tape, "The storm is in here." My own voice cracked into reverb, doubling on playback. I advanced again. Then the reel caught on something heavy, film slowing reluctantly as if snagged. On screen, another image of storm stretched wide. But this time, at the photograph's far right edge, a form appeared. Blurred, indistinct, yet undeniably human in stance. Shoulders, a head, standing against the void of white. I felt my breath leave as I whispered shakily, There's someone inside this frame." The figure had no detail, no face. Just outline, enough to unbalance me. My chest squeezed with sudden hollow fear. I tried to push the reel further, but the crank fought back. The reel ended abruptly, tape flapping loose. I pulled it out, heart hammering. The next box should have carried the continuation reel 18. My hands searched the drawers in a frenzy, pulling box after box. Spaces all filled with other numbers. But not 18. The sequence jumped entirely, skipped clean as though it never existed. I sat frozen beside humming machines, rain pressing against every surface with deafening persistence. My hand hovered over the recorder. The tape hiss held a strange clarity, mirroring my faltering breath. I whispered, powerless, "The next reel is missing." The room smelled of metal and dust, wires sprawled across the desk like tangled vines. I had set the wideband scanner at center, improvised insulation gathered from bits of foam and tape. The clock ticked toward midnight, its second hand dragging heavy. I pressed record and leaned close, voice steady, though my chest pulled tight with anticipation. Continuous sweep engaged. Logging initiated. The machine hummed a steady note, waterfall display trickling slow rivers of blue down the screen. At first, only noise, formless as ever. Hours crawled. The display showed nothing but scatter, faint rain of dots with no structure. I sketched the empty lines in my notebook, page after page of absences that mocked my effort. To make time pass, I narrated monotone, 1:m, nothing distinct. 2 a.m. minor scatter. The chair dug into my back, and fatigue sharpened every tick of the clock. The storm outside rolled closer, faint rumbles edging the windows. I thought of shutting down, catching small sleep. But something in me refused. It was always just around the corner, I told myself. Always one more hour. At 3 sharp, everything changed. The waterfall opened in sudden bloom. A spike, perfect and vertical, carved the screen in crimson against dark. My mouth went dry as I whispered, "Pattern detected." I leaned forward, breath fogging the glass. The line was too exact for nature, no drift, no wobble, just a towering beacon rising high, its top pulsing brighter. I froze, caught between awe and dread. Seconds later, it vanished cleanly, as though pulled back. My chest thudded. The emptiness left after such precision was more terrifying than randomness ever could be. Then it returned. Same place. Same height. The spike pulsed, expanding outward like a clock's hand turning with ruthless certainty. I recorded steadily, voice shaking. Entry logged. 3 a.m. spike recurrence. The machine ticked its counter in perfect sync, like joined breath. Then silence again. I waited long minutes, ears tuned so far into the hiss it felt woven through my skull. The line reappeared exactly when my clock's minute hand struck quarter past. My hand scrawled furiously in the notebook, writing numbers over numbers until they blurred. Each spike aligned with unnatural precision, each matched spacing. I whispered into Mike, not random scatter. This is mechanical, repeating, pattern locked. I replayed earlier logs, scrolling to compare. My jaw clenched suddenly. The timestamps, the exact times of emergence, mirrored departure dates from Operation Highjump. I had memorized them in obsessive repetition. The fleet left on January 2, departed port at dawn, convoyed south on the 3rd. The spikes now mirrored those dates, January 2nd, 3rd, 4th. The alignment shuddered my breath. This wasn't chance. This was itinerary carried forward into spectrum. The storm hammered louder beyond the walls. I wrote until my pencil cracked. Each spike returned like clockwork, but sharper, louder, brighter. I dialed my ally, voice raw as I described what I saw. She cut me off quick, her tone clipped with disbelief shading into fear. That's naval encryption structure, she breathed. Burst packet style. Except naval bursts have clean spectral edges. What you're seeing shouldn't have tails that bend like yours. I pressed harder. Then what am I looking at? She went silent a moment, then muttered like confessing to an old sin. Something that mimics naval traffic but doesn't source from any known transmitter. Patterns like that. They're fingerprints, but fingerprints of what? I don't know. I replayed the recording into phone speaker. She whispered, "They're too regular. Too steady. No scatter compromise. That fingerprint isn't ours." Her silence afterward loomed louder than thunder. The spike returned. This time twice over. Side by side, parallel threads ripping the display like twin escalators rising to nowhere. My equipment strained, meters climbing red, needles bent to their limits. The air in the room vibrated faintly as though the tone grew physical, a low ballast bass spilling across lungs. Outside, thunder cracked heavy enough to shake glass. Lightning flare bled through the curtains like intrusive fire. I shouted into recorder over the din. Spike doubled. Amplitude increasing. Pattern bending meters into red. Sweat clung across my neck, eyes locked to the display, even as instinct screamed to look away. The dual lines flickered once, shrieked in rigid brightness, then vanished simultaneously. Sudden silence crushed the room. Not even hiss. Not even rain. The kind of void thicker than noise. I held still, afraid even of breath. My ears rang hollow with absence. I whispered faintly, "Silence." Cut breath. The road out of town stretched empty, blacktop slick with recent rain. Headlights shone against low mist, thinning into endless dark fields. I drove in silence, the portable receiver boxed in the passenger seat, notebook wedged against the console. The idea pulled me onward. If the signal was bound only to my room, my desk, my house, then this was all imagination. But if it lived out here, in the open, then denial no longer worked. I turned down a narrow lane, gravel cracking beneath tires. The field stretched wide, grass bowed wet against the breeze. I cut the engine. The silence of rural night pressed around me. a hollow vastness broken only by the drip of cooling metal. I set the portable unit on the hood and flipped the switch. A thin hum rose, low and forgettable at first, like throat clearing. I pulled the headphones tight. Tuned the dial slow, careful. For minutes, nothing. Only hiss, the vast emptiness of broadcast air. Then pulse. Clear, familiar. The pattern repeated with unnerving precision. I whispered into the recorder. Same spacing. Same rhythm as the wideband test. My skin prickled. There was no storm static to confuse it now, only calm horizon. Yet the signature bloomed exact. The grass brushed my boots as I stepped away from the car. The sound clung to me like stitched fabric, riding in headphones with a pressure that throbbed low inside the skull. I described each rise, each beat falling exactly measured. My voice trembled, but method held. Pulse interval consistent. Local interference absent. No visible sources nearby. Then came a deeper twist. From the car itself, faint audio leaked. I froze. The cabin light was off. The ignition was still. And still, the dashboard radio whispered back the exact rhythm, though I hadn't tuned it, hadn't even powered it. I leaned halfway into the driver's seat, hand hovering over the dial. The pulses matched synchronously with the receiver on the hood. 2 different frequencies. Same living rhythm bleeding across devices. I whispered, "This isn't possible without rebroadcast." My body refused to move, recording every beat with shaky detail. The shock sat heavy in chest. Slowly the realization spread. If the car itself carried the signal, then the intrusion needed nothing but presence. No system, no setup, just intrusion of physics not documented. Almost on cue, my phone buzzed. My ally's voice cut sharp through winded static. I gave her details, rapid and half-panicked. Portable receiver aligned, identical to car radio. She cursed under her breath. Impossible. You'd need a rebroadcast rig to sync like that. Signal can't enlarge itself like a loop. I paced tight circles in the wet grass. Hand pressed hard against headphones, describing smaller details, a shift in interval spacing. Faint harmonic rise like a held breath rising too high. My ears throbbed with pressure, sinuses aching, as though I climbed steep altitude in seconds. I swallowed hard, coughing slightly. The pressure wouldn't ease out my ally's tone, sharpened through distortion. "You're describing resonance stress. Stop the test now." I shook my head, though she couldn't see. My whisper landed on tape with ragged edges. It feels alive inside the ear canal, like pounding where bones join. My stomach twisted as nausea crept through ribs. The pattern thickened, pulses closer, heavier. Meters on the receiver strained toward overload. I wiped sweat from my forehead, closing one eye against dizziness. The world tilted faintly, hunched horizon bending left. "Pressure increasing," I muttered, words slipping into coughing. The car's radio now blared loud enough that doors rattled slightly in their frames. Glass tinged with faint vibration. I reached for the receiver to shut it down, but my hand froze before the dial. Something in me crawled back, whispering to observe longer. My throat closed briefly, lungs dragging air only in staggered fragments. I forced words. Documenting. Still aligned. Both sources persistent. Abruptly, the receiver's hum cracked once, high-pitched, metallic. Lights on its panels sputtered into weak glow. My heart raced. Then the car's radio sputtered too, hiss folding into broken flutter. One after another, both devices cut out, dials dead, needles pegged to empty. The silence fell with a weight nearly physical, flattening across field and sky. I stumbled back from the hood, arms wrapped around myself though night was not cold. Ears rang hollow as if crushed quiet had substance. The silence pressed hard, heavier than either signal. Alone in dark wet field, gear lifeless, I whispered into handheld mic, the only device still rolling. Voice raw low, equipment powered down. Not by me. Nothing answered. Only crushing silence where a hum should be. The records office smelled of paper and mildew, the kind of damp that clings even to skin. A clerk left me alone with the logbook after a distracted glance, barely acknowledging my signature in the registry. I set it on the desk, thick and sunken with age, edges rough from decades of handling. My recorder was already rolling, angled so the microphone pointed down toward the paper. I opened cautiously. Entire paragraphs were drowned under black smears, ink so thick it shone in dull bands against the page's pale surface. My fingertip hovered just above the blocks, wavering almost in shame, as though touching them might smear further. I began to read softly around the censorship, lips brushing close to the mic. Crew rotation listings. Date unclear. Multiple personnel removed and replaced mid-voyage. My breath quivered. The same surnames appeared again, duplicated across different weeks as if written twice in slightly altered hand. I frowned, scanning closely. The same names written repeatedly, I whispered. Not simple record. Feels like memory repeating itself. I turned a page. More black floods. But one unredacted margin caught me. Noted, mag field disturbance observed during cum sweep. 3 words clear before the sentence was drowned in ink. The weight of those fragments pressed on me in silence. My voice softened to a confessional murmur. They've cut context, but left residue. It reads less like censorship and more like erasure. Like memory tampered rather than lines crossed. I touched the paper edge with shaking hand. The sheet crackled faintly beneath the weight. My phone buzzed. I pressed it to ear. My ally breathed with muted suspicion as I described the repeating names. The clipped phrase about magnetic field disturbance. Her tone was clipped but exact. Scan the page under infrared. Sometimes ink isn't complete. Bleed through lives beneath redactions. I pulled a small lamp from the drawer, one left for researchers photographing faint text. The bulb spilled infrared glow across the page, and for a moment it looked unchanged. Then, slowly, hidden letters rose behind the black like faint bruises surfacing. My voice caught in astonishment. I leaned tighter into mic. There are characters below it. The letters blurred and shifted as I angled light left, then right. But together, they aligned into a series of coordinates. My stomach sank as recognition gripped me. Same void. Same coordinates as before. I shut my eyes briefly. The office windows rattled. Rain lashed hard, striking glass like insistent knuckles. The rhythm fell exact, a metronome carved by weather unnatural in timing. I held the book open, frozen in place, whispering, "This is repeating, just like their names on the roster." Coordinates bleeding back through, no matter the ink. The desk lamp flickered faint, bulb gasping. The microphone hummed, distortions crawling in jagged edges at the edges of tape. I leaned close again, almost trembling, speaking softer than I ever had. The book feels alive, heavy, like breathing restrained under every blocked line. The rain clattered louder, sinking perfectly to my cadence. I stopped speaking, expecting storm to wander its own rhythm. Instead, the lashes of water continued steady, beat for beat, like a clock following my silence. My chest tightened, throat dry. Into the mic, a fragile whisper. The book is breathing. And then came nothing. No storm, no hiss, no sound at all. Just silence pressing into the microphone so hard the tape distorted, warping absence itself. I sat hunched at the desk with reels spread around me, notebooks half open, pages warped by damp. The storm from the night before still lingered somewhere distant, a pulse outside the walls. To test what I had captured, I threaded the recorder back, spools turning slow, hiss filling the room with familiar breath. My own voice spoke from earlier nights, measured, cautious, sometimes trembling. But beneath it, faintly, something else moved. At first, I thought it was bleed. Some faint echo of surrounding noise picked up inadvertently. But when I leaned close, the hairs on my arms stiffened. There were whispers layered low, just under the surface. Too patterned for random gravel. Their rhythm was clipped, framed like syllables. I whispered to myself, not artifact, not mistake. I layered filters across playback, adjusting treble, dampening bass. Slowly coherence surfaced. The whispers began to arrange into sound that resembled phrases. Broken, fragmented words. Unfinished, yet too insistent to dismiss. I shifted knobs gently, breath caught tight, as the fragments fused into syllables that almost carried meaning. My heart hammered. I repeated them softly. Car, re-forward. Hold lines, stay. Unheard. The words fell backward inside my throat, unnatural to speak aloud, as though voicing them was a trespass. I froze in the chair, staring at the tape wheels turning patient and steady, as if nothing monumental leaked beneath. I reached for my phone and called my ally, voice low. I described the strange whispers emerging from older recordings. She paused before replying, tone practical but laced with anxiety. If you're filtering heavy, maybe it's feedback loops. Tape can recycle sound. Machines generate false echoes. But as she spoke, the whispers persisted audibly under my own recorded words. Climbing louder alongside our conversation, I pressed the phone to the speaker so she could hear. She went quiet. Then, through faint crackle, she said firmly, "Stop reading into ghosts. The mind makes order when it wants it bad." I didn't answer right away, because beneath the distortion, the syllables kept pressing forward. Carry forward, I heard again. Cleaner now. I opened a dictionary I kept near and traced my finger against the words I thought I had heard, confirming each existed, though not always in sequence. Nothing exotic. Plain words. Yet their placement filled me with suspicion, as if instruction hid inside them. The strange part, the unbearable part, was that on a second playback the whispers adjusted again. They didn't repeat exactly. They advanced, as though the act of listening reshaped what was there. I muttered into the microphone, not stuck in tape. This happens live, as if playback itself summons them. My voice shook with grounded fear. I stopped the machine sharply, reels groaning to stillness. The hiss collapsed. Silence thudded inside the room, louder than the static had ever been. It pressed against my head, a hollow roar of nothing. I swallowed hard. My breath sounded too loud. I whispered finally into tape. The listening itself births messages. Direct into me. Like seeds pressed into memory that didn't exist before. Each word trembled with weight I couldn't measure. I cut the mic entirely, watching the red light die out. The silence remained, dense and choking. A presence heavier than noise. I sat in it for long minutes, nothing to anchor me but my pulse and ears. Still, I couldn't escape the compulsion. Tomorrow, I knew without doubt, I must listen again. The date circled itself on the calendar, whether I wished it or not. Another year marked since my brother had vanished, lost somewhere between log entries and silence. That night I set every machine I owned into a rough circle around me. Their dials tilted inward, like an improvised ritual built of electronics. Reels spun, receivers hummed. The portable set balanced on a chair beside the desk. Rain lashed the windows and the air was unnaturally warm, thunder already advancing in heavy staccato. I pressed the record button, my own breath filling the opening seconds of tape. The storm deepened. Power flickered once, knocking the lamp to a dull stutter, but the machines remained alive. Their faces blinked faint amber tones, carriers waiting like eyes straining for signal. I sat among them, whispering into the central mic. Tonight marks another year. The words shook, grief and ritual wrapped together. Outside glass trembled under each gust while inside. The hiss of static surged stronger than usual, layering into every channel dot at first. Each receiver muttered in its own discordant voice different frequencies, unfinished patterns. But slowly, under the gale's push, they began to align. The wideband spike flickered familiar peaks. The car radio inside the garage began to hum in unison, though keys sat on the counter. Even the handheld unit in my palm trembled with the same rhythm. I stared wide-eyed at the convergence, whispering into tape, "They're syncing. They're converging like one system." As thunder cracked, the alignment became almost melodic. Pulses merged into coarse but undeniable music, a rhythm built across machines never meant to join. My hands trembled when the tones bent, opening a hollow channel between. From inside that bloom, a voice emerged. Not whisper this time, not filtered residue, but clear enough that I froze entirely. It was my brother's voice. Calling my name, every nerve fired at once, panic and hope colliding. My throat opened in a choked sob. I leaned toward the mic with shaking confession. "I hear him." The syllables repeated, warm and terrible, layered inside seismic noise. His voice shouldn't have existed within meters of tape, but still it cut sharp, intimate, like speaking directly beside me. The phone buzzed. I answered without tearing my gaze from the receivers, hand pressed white around plastic. My ally's voice was terrified, raised to a shout. "Shut it down. Cut the system before it locks. You don't understand. Once the imprint fixes, it won't leave." Her urgency tangled with my own collapse of reason. "But it's him," I shouted back hoarse. My voice cracked at edge of sob. "It's him calling me." Machines screamed harmony across the circle, patterns joined larger than weather or wire. She insisted desperately through static. "You don't want this burned into you. It doesn't give back. Kill the current now." Lightning struck so close the desk shook. The equipment glared bright as if poised to split. But I couldn't sever it. My fingers froze against every switch. My entire body bent toward the impossible familiarity of my brother's voice. The seconds stretched, looping into an unbearable tether between grief and terror. I whispered into the mic, torn open, "I can't leave him again." My tears hit the desk unchecked, mixing with jagged vibrations rattling metal casings. The resonance grew, a single roar cut from converged bands. And then it all stopped. Every screen, every bulb, every hum dropped into total black. Not dimmed, not reduced, cut clean. I gasped in sudden vacuum, ears filling only with my own panicked breath, dragging ragged through chest. The tape caught it raw, my voice and pulse the soul sound in suffocating absence. In that silence I knew without comprehension. It had begun. Her voice carried late across the wire, thinner than usual, yet steadier in tone. I had called after the blackout, my chest cracked open, every nerve begging someone else to confirm what I'd heard. She didn't waste time. "You want the truth," she said. "I'll give you some of it." I leaned into the recorder, hands trembling, the red light glaring, my own throat gone coarse with waiting. She explained how, decades earlier, her unit had been tasked with scanning wideband channels for unauthorized broadcasts. Not enemy propaganda, not spurious chatter, patterns, pulses, bursts that didn't match any civilian or military signature. She confessed she had been young then, only beginning, and thought it harmless. They all did. But recruits who logged long exposures started to change. Her voice hardened with memory. She described men who jolted suddenly, like struck by a seizure, yet no medical chart could pin any cause. Others wandered into barracks rooms confused, swearing hours had passed when they were absent only minutes. "We called it drift," she murmured. "Memory sliding on itself like ice. You couldn't trust your own recall." She took a breath, shaky, catching herself muttering into silence. There were documents, case summaries, but they never reached shelves. Locked behind glass, shifted to cabinets we weren't cleared to open. They didn't want people to know a sound could fracture you. I sat back in my chair, throat swelling with raw relief. For the first time, every trembling observation I had made, every sleepless conviction, stood on ground firmer than my own obsession. She believed. She was telling me because she had lived it. My voice cracked as I whispered, "Thank you. Someone else." Someone else saw this too. I pressed closer to the mic, as if proximity made gratitude truer. I'm not fabricating noise. The recorder caught the wet edge of tears in my throat. She sighed tiredly. "You're not fabricating, but you're leaning into it. The longer you stay, the more it stays in you." That's what they feared most, contagion of listening. Outside, rain lashed once more, bins clattering in the alley beyond the wall. The tape hiss made every word softer, more intimate, like confession tied by current. Then her line shifted. A faint ripple edged into her words. A tremor crouched beneath syllables. I frowned and pressed receiver tighter to ear. "Say again?" I asked, but her voice bent around the pulse, chopping at edges. She hadn't noticed yet or pretended not to. The ripple hardened into a crackle, the same signature pulse I had logged so many nights before. Slow at first, an unwelcome cadence beneath her speaking voice. She asked quickly, "Are you hearing that?" I muttered, numb. "It's on your end." Her breath quickened against the earpiece. No, it can't be here. It doesn't." She stopped, then swore sharply. The feed bent violently, harmonics slicing through her every word like serrated teeth. She stuttered, cursed again, panic blistering through the line. Then a harsh gasp. I pressed into the mic frantically, documenting, heart hammering into gut, pulse bleeding into her channel, identical to prior interference. My fingers dug into the recorder casing. Each scream of distortion bent her vowels into a doubled echo, her tone incomplete. Finally she shouted, "Shut it!" "I don't." The line snapped dead. I yanked the phone away, staring at silent glass. My pulse beat like thunder that never faded. I played the call back immediately. On tape, her words cracked yet clearer than live, as if the medium pulled secrets sharper. My hair raised at what rewound through the speaker. There were two voices, both hers but layered imperfectly. One, frantic human. The other dragging half a syllable behind, metallic, artificial echo bending familiar speech into mimic. I stared at the reels turning, my legs frozen. The investigation had always been my private descent, my insomnia stitched on tape. But not anymore. The pulse had reached her side, spilled into a second life beyond my walls. The recorder hissed steady, heavy, before I could whisper again, hoarse, shaking. "It isn't mine alone." The desk was covered edge to edge, maps overlapping each other like scales. Some were printed satellite grids, others old polar charts yellowed with age. I pinned them down with books, corners curling stubborn against damp. My notebook lay open beside them, already crowded with half-finished graphs, lines drawn in uneven pencil. I pressed record, lifted the mic, and tried to steady my voice, attempting triangulation. Using known coordinates, overlaying against frequency notes recorded since day one. The pencil scraped across paper as I spoke. Each stroke felt mechanical. I drew long intersecting lines across maps, calculating in rough ratios. Distances arranged into crude triangles stretched against geographic void. If timing aligns, then exposure arcs here, I murmured, circling the dead rectangle I had stared at too many times. My breath grew shallow, but my tone forced calm. I thought, foolishly, that if logic wrapped the mystery tight enough, it would lose power. Hours passed with arithmetic creeping across my notes, columns of numbers beside dates, ratios calculated against spike intervals. I read equations into the mic, methodical when my pulse was anything but 3 interventions per cycle, returning at fixed intervals. Anchor maybe 45 nautical miles from coordinate blur. My body obeyed calculation, but mind reeled behind. The storm outside was faint now, only an occasional patter of water breaking silence. The room held stillness too rigid, too expectant. My breath broke mid-sentence as the static reappeared without warning. First low hiss buried faint in the recorder, then rising into a cut. My voice faltered. The reels did not relay clean sound. Instead, characters streamed across the small display in garbled scatter symbols, not letters, not numbers. Overriding my input stopped my hand seized. Device compromised, I whispered with shaking disbelief. Recorder no longer logging voice. Stream interference pushing through. The screen bled unreadable characters across every corner, crawling like infection through software. I yanked the notebook closer, continued scribbling by hand. But the pencil line fractured, breaking as light above me flickered into weak low-glow dot maps trembled under sudden gust battering the window. My diagrams shriveled in sweat, slick hands. The reels groaned harsher, output spewing corrupted sound. Instead of hissing pulses, it churned twisting blocks of mechanical noise, overlaid in relentless pace. I cursed under ragged breath, trying to override by flipping the power switch. The machine stayed alive, ignoring command like a possessed body refusing to collapse. I narrated desperate fragments even as panic overtook method. Ratios collapse, bearing intersections broken. Documentation unreadable. I clawed at the cord, ripping power down from socket. Sparks jumped faint against floor. The reels spun once more, then died. For a long second, the room breathed hollow as blackout, but the damage was done. My maps were splintered, ink smeared unreadable across where my palm had slammed with frustration. My notebook lay streaked with overlapping lines, no longer forming geometry. Anger, hot and hopeless, bled against my ribs. I hurled the pencil away, slammed the recorder shut with violent crack. My own voice raged into mic. It doesn't want mapping. It doesn't want understanding. Breath came sharp, uneven, filling the silence that followed. My chest heaved. For the first time I admitted what every night sequenced toward. The signal resisted. Whatever lived inside those pulses thrived only when I broke. And mapping the reduction to chart and coordinate was insult. I slumped forward, trembling, whispering through clenched throat. It doesn't ask for discovery. The words cracked, withered into despair. It wants submission. The room stayed dark, outlines unsteady with weak lamp glow. My shoulders sagged against the chair. Resolve shattered by my own tools turning enemy, by memory running into shadow. I closed my eyes, voice barely audible in recorder's final gasp. Faith snapped. I can't hold line straight, not anymore. What remained was only trembling quiet, hanging low and unrelenting. The night air clung damp as I hauled the metal can into the small patch of yard behind the house. Rust streaked along its rim, dented from years forgotten. I carried the notebook pressed to my chest, its bent spine heavy with broken graphs and stains. The pages felt colder than paper should, like they carried residue of something that did not want to rest. My throat burned with the decision, but my hands shook with resolve. I pressed record and whispered, "Ending this tonight." The match flared, brief and orange, shaking between my fingers before dropping into dried scraps piled in the can. Fire caught reluctantly, chewing at corners of cardboard, then swallowed the first page I cast down. My notebook bent open with surrender as flames crawled lines of ink. I narrated each motion, voice stripped raw. Handwritten notes placed into fire. Ink smudged, words dissolving. Black curls lifted into smoke and drifted against my face, acrid, biting. For a moment I felt release. Watching diagrams dismember under flame seemed final. But then the burn changed. The fire did not consume randomly, it pulsed. Flames jerked bright, dimmed, then burst again, as if dragged by hidden metronome. I froze, leaning close. The rhythm was too close to mistake. The same pulse I had logged for weeks, now carved into living fire. My breath fractured into recorder. Flames responding in pattern. Impossible, not wind. No draft. Each flare illuminated yard in staccato flashes, like strobes snapping memory against walls. I tried to convince myself it was chance, but ash flicks rose on the same beat, swirling in flight before sinking back. A rhythm I could count, same spacing, same stubborn alignment. I staggered backward, chest knotting hard. Even fire does not free me, I whispered without meaning to. The flare burst brighter at that line, cruel affirmation. Grief surged up with terrifying speed, as though uncovered layer by violent hand. I bent double, choking on air. It's all futile, I stammered. Pages, maps, reels, nothing stops it. My brother is still gone. He has been gone every night. And I am the one still here, forcing shapes inside noise. The tape captured each crack in voice, each collapse I had resisted. I admitted into microphone like prayer. This absence breaks skin every time I wake. Nothing left but echoes that don't end. And I keep listening because maybe one will carry his name. My phone rang suddenly in pocket. I fumbled, startled, flame glare blinding. I answered, pressing it to ear with breath still ragged. My ally's voice lunged out, urgent, trembling. Stop what you're doing. Her tone shook harder than mine, breaking under weight of interference. Even as she spoke, distortion cratered her sentences, heavy consumption of signal drowning vowels. I begged, I wanted it gone. She barked through static, it won't burn. You're only feeding. Then her words strangled into electronic choking, corrupted like someone suffocating through circuitry. The sound clawed against me, unbearable. I slammed phone closed, hand trembling as metal casing rang against palm. The yard went dead quiet, except for heavy hiss of fire still pulsing exactly measured. My knees nearly buckled. I grabbed the recorder and gasped into it, line corroded. Heard her choking. Not real, not full human. Still, it reached even into her voice. The last of my notes turned to curling ash. Yet rhythms glowed inside flame as if refusing finality. The sight hollowed me. I whispered in defeat. Even fire cannot erase it. The signal burns brighter through refusal. I stared until embers beat like veins, pulse after pulse unrelenting. My hands shook open, unable to carry another page forward. The flame told me it was no escape. The hospital archive was buried in a wing few bothered to unlock. Paint flaked from the door, hinges rasped like old breath. Inside, the air was stale, sharp with cleaning agents that hadn't touched the dust. Rows of steel cabinets lined the walls, drawers labeled in ink bled brown with age. I whispered into the recorder, Naval Hospital records. Late 1940s section, my voice already tight. I slid drawers open, pulling thin folders, the paper inside brittle, almost glass. Most were routine, broken bones, frostbite, malnutrition. But at the bottom of one drawer lay a cluster of unmarked files, their tabs blank. I set them on the shelf and turned a page. My hand froze. Typed lines described something absent from official books. Audio-induced fugue states. Temporary disassociations. Persistence of phantom stimuli. Each phrase dulled my chest into hollow weight. The charts repeated with unnerving similarity. Different patients. Identical symptoms. Men who claimed to hear noise that didn't exist. Men who forgot their service hours. Men who spoke of static woven between their thoughts. Yet every summary ended with the same phrase stamped official red. Non-combat casualty. My whisper cracked through the recorder. They erased their context. Soldiers returned from Operation Highjump listed only as accidents, peripheral. Not combat, yet poisoned by sound. I turned slower, fingers tighter around the edges of brittle sheets. Some listed drawn diagrams of brain activity flattened into incoherent scrawls. Others included written evaluations, patient reports, auditory echoes, commands repeating, cannot verify externally. Another, subject insists voice persisted across silence, diagnosis inconclusive, recommending closed observation. Shivers crawled my spine. I pressed closer into microphone, voice smaller, confessional. This has been here all along, documented, hiding under categories no one questions. My hands trembled, forcing me to brace against shelf. Rain hit faint against glass overhead, tapping in restless rhythm. The phone buzzed low. I answered quietly, heart already clenched. My ally's whisper unrolled through static, careful, tired. I gave terse descriptions of what I'd read. For once she didn't argue or soften. Her voice broke faint. That's not fiction. That's what we feared. They sent them back sick and never told anyone what sick meant. Her silence stretched. Then she whispered again, low and shaken. This isn't paranoia. This is record. I closed my eyes, swallowed against the tightness climbing my throat. I wanted to feel vindicated, but instead only dread swelled. I whispered into recorder. It all aligns. Highjump's shadow carried back in flesh. In hearing. In breakage of mind. The steel cabinet behind me hummed faintly. At first I thought it was building ventilation. But the hum thickened, rising tonal steps, climbing sharper and sharper. The recorder's gain meter struck yellow as my voice cracked, tone present. Increasing frequency. Climbing beyond normal registry. I pressed the device closer to shelf, ears tightening with pain. The air itself sharpened, thin needles pressing against drums. I winced, nearly dropping the recorder as the tone pushed higher. My molars vibrated soft, skull buzzing. The folders trembled faint but steady, edges lifting with frequency alone. I gasped into mic. Hurts. This physically hurts now. Luminescent bulbs flickered faint overhead. My arm spasmed against vibration. I staggered backward to loosen the pressure. The tone stopped instantly. Ceased as though never there. In its absence, pounding silence hollowed the room. My pulse-filled ears louder than storm outside. I pressed both hands flat against the recorder to steady them and whispered, ragged, I should leave. I need to leave. But breath betrayed me. I bent back toward microphone, voice quieter, stripped of defense. I won't. I can't. I already can't stop. The decision came with no ceremony, only exhaustion layered on obsession. I could no longer circle around papers and reels, shuffling fragments that dragged me in endless orbit. If the coordinates refused to stay buried, then I would meet them at their source. The booking was done quietly, passage secured through a vessel signed to survey ice. Ship manifests listed my name in small script between technicians, no reason for anyone to look deeper. I packed as though for research. Though we both know I carried no science, but persistence. My ally read my final message hours later. Her reply arrived short, clipped, strained. She warned me she could no longer follow where I intended to go. She begged me to stop, her words sharper than before. Yet they arrived thin, as though weighted with her own static. I read the text aloud into the recorder softly, knowing I would ignore it even as the words hit my skin like salt. She was breaking away for survival, but I had crossed the point of no return long ago. The harbor groaned with ropes and cranes, vessels tilting in restless tide. Cold sank deep, already stealing breath even before departure. I whispered into mic, cataloging every moment. Boarded. Manifest confirmed. Ship scheduled ice approach within 3 days. The crew looked through me like one more cargo hand. No attachment. That suited me. I carried no lies to hold up against questions. Just my notes sealed in pack, the recorder my only confidant. The sea began as steel calm, stretching flat horizon. Air tasted wet with salt until it dulled into constant numbness. Hours bled together as gulls vanished behind us and gray took over. Every surface of deck slick with water, boots stamping in rhythm like machines. The cold never lifted, soaking through layers, skin always damp. The rain did not fall in drops but slid constant across railing. The word endlessly wet became more fact than description. I leaned against bulkhead, speaking into recorder during late hours when crew turned to sleep. Horizon empty. Nothing above, nothing below but endless mirror. Feels staged, like vast curtain hiding some structure too immense to face openly. My throat ached with confession. The more I stared outward, the more convinced I became that blankness concealed rather than showed. The first night passed unremarkable. But on the second, while men card played in dim mess, my handheld equipment sparked to life without touch. I had left it resting in pack unpowered. Still, the meter flared sudden, the dial blinking erratic peaks. I dug it out in nervous haste, switching on recorder. The readings formed rhythmic sequence, rising, falling, equal spacing, too measured to misclassify. I whispered tight, intentional pattern. Not stray interference. The sound that emerged felt faint but pointed, tapping against edge of hearing. Crew nearby dismissed it when I mentioned. They shrugged, citing weather phenomena, stray frequencies bouncing ice. Their indifference hurt almost more than the noise itself. But my chest pounded certain they didn't hear rhythm because it was never meant for them. Third night. Something shifted in atmosphere itself. Even walls of bunk groaned out under strain, as if air pressure thickened within hull. Recorder lay on small table beside bed, tape rolling steady. At intervals, static expanded around it, thick and absolute. Not background scatter, but density layering into walls. I whispered hoarsely, static building into architecture. Feels like enclosure tightening on machine, on me. I knew then the system waited. Every hour south carried me closer to the blank rectangle I had traced on maps. Each gust of spray slapped reminder. Each pulse from handheld stitched conviction sharper. At coordinates ahead, silence would not remain void. It would open. I pressed my lips near the mic, breath turning frost on steel casing. Whispering words half sworn, half terrified. We are approaching the dead zone, and the signal is already laying walls around my recorder. It is waiting for me. The ship slowed as titanic shelves of ice rose into view, white walls glowing dim under gray sky. The scale collapsed every sense of proportion. Mountains unnaturally flat, edges fractured into frozen cathedrals. I pressed the recorder against chest, whispering through numb lips. Coordinates confirmed. Approaching dead zone margin. The deck creaked, chains groaned. Spray froze across railing, skin burning against air so sharp it drew tears just to breathe. I joined the survey team lowering ramp onto shelf. Boots struck metal, then pressed onto snow crust so hard it rang beneath each step. The wind howled vicious through cracks overhead, long tunnels singing like throats of cavernous organs. I described every turn into mic, words trembling between awe and fear. This place swallows scale. Noise threads wend like instrument tuned wrong. My breath dragged audibly across tape. We moved further onto ice, geophones placed neat at intervals. Wires trailed, sensors registering baseline vibrations. At first, readings came ordinary enough low rumbles of shifting glacial mass, wind pressing heavy. But then spikes began to hammer across monitors. Peaks there one moment, gone the next, like pulse disguised as seismic echo. I stared, whispering raw, pattern repeating. Identical to frequency logs. Ice resonating exact. The others muttered boredom. Their instruments noted nothing unusual enough to warrant attention. Only my headset screamed sharp. Beneath boots, the ground trembled faintly in rhythm. Not quake, but aligned interval. My recorder hissed as the air shifted hotter tinny inside ear canal. Suddenly the receiver at my belt erupted. Not crackle, not scatter. A clean, unbroken tone struck all at once. It didn't travel through hearing, but carved straight into memory itself. My mind filled with brightness, like pages seared onto thought. I staggered back, clutching chest, yelling into microphone names torn by frantic instinct, his name foremost, broken between syllables. Each shout half an anchor, half a prayer against collapse. The tone deepened, folding itself into pulse, echoing like vast chamber emptiness wedged inside skull. My own voice screamed hoarse attempts to narrate, the words snagged jagged. Unbroken tone. Direct to core. Bypassing ears. My desperate gasps tagged the tape louder than any log. I turned to crew, eyes wild, waving hands. They only stared blank, confusion plain. What noise? One asked, mask freezing with breath. My throat wailed ragged. You don't hear this? You don't feel it? But they looked at me as though I'd fractured, concerned for sanity rather than danger. Their equipment screens displayed baseline, no disturbance registered, nothing unusual. Their deafness cracked me in two. I dropped to knees, pressing recorder hard into snow. Words rasped over stuttered hysterics. I alone carry this intrusion. Ice translator only through me. I pounded glove against frozen crust. The vibrations echoed too easily, sounding hollow, cavernous. My whisper slashed low into microphone. Proof lives beneath us. The ground thrummed beneath ribs, unrelenting, spreading deep like breath, trapped inside glacier lungs. Every trace of reason leaked from mine, leaving only raw panic soaked into tape. My voice fractured, voice of someone unstitched. The ground beneath is hollow. The fissure yawned open where the ice fractured, a jagged wound descending into blue light. I followed ropes down, metal cold biting through gloves, every movement captured in shallow echoes. The recorder pressed against my chest hummed with faint background hiss, tape unspooling, my breath rasping steady into mic. Descending below surface. Depth unmeasured. Air colder, yet oddly still. Each word tremored inside fabric, louder than intended dot at the floor. My boots struck packed snow that thudded hollow. Light from headlamp cut forward into an opening I could not call natural. Angled sheets of metal jutted from walls, fragments bent inward as though drawn toward a vanished center. At a glance they looked like antennae, crude skeletal forms arcing into convergence. I whispered, voice slowed by awe and fear. Chamber-lined. Metal fragments turned like listening inward. My throat felt weighted as sound bounced back too smooth. Reverberation speaking longer than my own breath. Closer examination showed inscriptions cut along surfaces. I stumbled forward, knees rattling. My lamp caught the carvings. Engraved coordinates repeated again and again, identical loops spiraling downward. I traced one set with gloved finger trembling. They all matched the void on maps, endless affirmation etched into steel. My voice fell soft as prayer. Coordinates engraved in metal veins. Looping infinitely. Compelled, I reached out and touched cold edge. The recorder detonated with noise instant. Channels split wide open, each side roaring competing voices. Left ear filled with piercing shriek, right ear sunk into guttural rasp. I yanked back but sound clung. The tape caught my gasp, terror carved audible. Amid the chaos, a voice surfaced jagged but recognizable. My ally's tone, yet displaced, twisted wrong as though passing through wrong body. Her words half-formed, repeated out of sequence. Stop, leave, hear me, stop. But it wasn't her. Not the her I knew. This was distortion wearing her cadence, echo bent like her ghost projected forward. I clutched recorder tight, desperate but frantic, hissing into it. Her voice but wrong. Here, though absent. Presence not her. The realization crashed hard. This chamber was not an origin. No transmitter source. It was vault. Storage for signals themselves, artifacts collected and stored under ice. I shouted broken confession into microphone. Not creation. Not birthplace. This is archive. Signal held here like fossil. My pulse thrashed irregular as I connected threads. The rain static I first followed at home had not been the real thing, it was echo. Decades later, transmission leaking from this frozen warehouse. But why? Why store fragments? My words faltered, teeth chattering between lines. Question unanswered, reason. My voice dropped out, nothing filling the gap but pounding hiss. The recorder made noise out of silence exhalations that were not mine. Breaths synchronized, steady rhythm behind my coughs. Unequal spacing, like many lungs moving together faint through tape. My headlamp shook as I whispered, rattled down to marrow. I am not alone. The chamber trembled first as faint vibration, then as violent quake shaking walls of ice. Fractures cracked overhead like rifles firing in sequence. I clutched recorder to chest, words spilling uneven and frantic. Chamber destabilizing. Resonance surge climbing. My voice bled into distortion as sound ladders tore across waves. Every meter on the device pegged red. Hiss folding into data compressed beyond hearing. Metal shards lining the vault began to glow faintly under headlamp, edges steaming as if heated from within. My receiver screamed across frequencies, no longer pulses but solid roar, sweeping every band, climbing so fast the tape itself warped. I gasped into mic, equipment. Failing. Recorder screaming stream, unstoppable. Heat baked into battery casing, chemical reek filling air. Plastic scenes curled and spat smoke, then my chest seized. Wave hit like blast all air at once torn away. I fought to drag breath, lungs collapsing as if underwater. My narration fractured. Apnea shockwave pressure, cannot draw air. Each word clawed against throat, shredded by pulse hammering more inside than outside. My balance vanished. Knees struck snow floor with hollow echo. Through wreckage of sound intervals broke wider apart. In those shards I heard them. Orders. Instructions layered like overlapping chants. Not aimed to me but through me, positioning my own body as carrier. Fragments spilled sharp, disguised directive. Hold line. Carry forward. They poured like freighted command no tongue had right to catch. My body strained upright, stumbling toward Fisher rope. Recorder still shrieked, lights sputtering. I left other equipment spitting smoke, their screams tearing into endless harmonics. I retched, clawing upward out of frozen vault, breath clipped in jagged gasps. Each muscle failed yet carried by something else. It was not me climbing. It was the signal puppeting flesh to surface above ground. The storm roared ordinary to ears of crew. They heard only subtle rumble, ice cracking the way it has for centuries. Faces turned questioningly toward me, unaware that my recorder still wailed unnatural shriek behind ribs. They shouted for explanation, but I stumbled past, head shaking mutely. My mic caught only the hiss of blood pressure beating out comprehension. Back aboard, I replayed the tape alone, trembling hands shuffling reels. What filled room left no question of accident? Crystal detail, voices broadcasting instruction with no veil left. Real language sharpened into cadence, undeniable proof of presence. But every syllable cut, toxic to thought, searing across spine. My whisper collapsed raw into mic, undeniable, but poisonous. Proof not meant to be held. I pressed fists against skull, forcing one more admission as breath shredded. They don't need me listening anymore. They already have me. Silence drew no contradiction. I croaked final horror, no confession so much as realization. I have become broadcast. The room feels smaller than when I left it, though nothing inside has changed. Same desk, same window streaked by rain, same cabinet with drawers swollen from damp. Yet walls lean closer, pressing inward, as if aware my body no longer fills them with strength. I lower myself into chair, breath wheezing soft. bones aching under linnet. The recorder sits waiting on table, red light like pulse. I press it on with hands that tremble far more than when this began. My voice creeps thin. Back home. Weeks after. Return. Attempting final log. Each word scratches deeper inside throat, exhausted but committed. I force my tone gentle, quiet confessional. Rain ticks ceaseless against panes, a backdrop no longer stranger but companion. I whisper. I cannot tell where memory ends and playback begins anymore. Thoughts arrive as echoes, layered. Uncertain whether lived once or implanted after tape repeated them indoors a dozen times. I reach for stack of reels. Each labeled carefully yet now erase into blur when threaded. Sound identical whether new or old. Distinction lost. I laugh hoarse through the mic. 2 months collapsed into same second. I replay and replay, but what returns carries not chronology, only pressure. My laugh dies caught between ribs. My ally has not answered since the night static consumed her words. I dial messages, letters, all empty. When I spin the tape she mailed me, expecting her logs, nothing fills them. Blank silence. I speak it aloud, her voice erased. Or overwritten. Pain slices at chest, but I cannot even grieve properly. Anything silence touches feels suspicious now. Silence is not absence, but fullness pressed in. I close my eyes a long while before whispering again. Once this was grief. Simple ache. I followed signal like thread back toward my brother's absence. Maybe I thought proof could summon him. Maybe obsession wrapped grief into hammer. My tone fractures, skin dimpling cold across arms. But now, grief no longer drives me. Something else stands inside my voice. It waits to speak on my breath. Rain outside does not relent. Hours blur yet sky stays same bruised color. Even when I glance between curtains at 3 different times, downpour never shifts pace. It is one eternal decline, since the same low hiss my receiver once carried. I mutter into tape. The storm has married the frequency. No natural separation left. I cough hard, spit tasting iron. My frame shrivels smaller inside chair. Still I lean forward. Every word pressed here may not be mine anymore. If sentences align smoother, if syllables unfold too exact, no, it isn't me. Voice has shape beyond body, borrowing my tone. I surrender every line to it now, intentionally or not. I drag air again. If grief began this, something beyond grief owns what ends it. Recorder clicks gently, reels twisting steady as though thirsty. I lack the strength to stop them. Instead I let admission bleed final. I leave this one. This last. My breath rattles through teeth. Suddenly distortion rolls into line, smooth like curtain drawn back, no start point, no crackle. Static opening into shape, into clarity unervingly pure. I whisper as it swells. This is conclusion. Not scream. Only acceptance. My lungs release one ragged exhale that tape grips forever. The distortion takes what remains and blooms full. Words obliterate. Only exhalation sealed. The last signal carried not to ears in this room, but to whoever touches play.